All right, so the recording looks like it's begun. All right, so welcome back, guys. Hope you're having a good week and good Thursday. A couple of things that I wanted to announce here early on. I don't know if you guys recognize or not, but I'm in my office right now, so I came to campus. What I've decided is my office hours will be until this class period on Thursday. So what we will do is I'll have office hours from 11:30 until 1:30. So for those of you who are in Antalya, if you want to stop by and if you have any need to have some type of discussion face to face, I'll be here. I should be here in my office most of those Thursdays. For anyone else who either is not in Antalya or for health reasons, which I completely understand, don't want to meet face to face, what that means is I should be available during those times. Okay, so between 11:30 and 1:30, I'll kind of block off and not have anything else scheduled to do during those hours. Okay, so let's see, a couple of other questions that I wanted to go over. So you guys have seen that there's an assignment that's been posted. Hopefully some of you have already at least taken a look at it. Let me go ahead and I want to share. Let me share this. There it is. All right. So what I want to do is I want to kind of go over a few things that I've had some questions about. So in addition to a Java file.
I'm so sorry, Professor. Have you started recording?
Are we back? Looks like call got dropped or something. Okay, so I don't know. I hope everybody's back. Let me see. It looks like most of you are back on the call. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. That happened last week with another class too. Ugh. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. All right, let's try this again. Hopefully no one. It looks like there's a second call that got started. One second, I want to go ahead and kill that other call. Not really sure why that join created a second call. Let me end it. The recording should be started. It says the recording has started, so I got a notification. I guess if you it says it's recording. Okay. Well, let's see. Where were we before I got dropped? Oh, let's see. Okay, so in addition to a Java file, which will be all the Java code for this assignment, I also want you to upload some image files. They can be .png, .jpeg. You could put them all together into a Word document or into a Google document and then save it as a PDF. However you want to do that, that's fine. But you need to have at least these 6 files. Actually, I guess this fourth one here is optional, and I'll explain why. But what I want you to do is so when you pull up your IDE, your IntelliJ, JGrass, whatever you're using, and you start writing your Java code, at some point you're going to save it and compile it. Okay, And I want you, when you click that compile button for the first time you click compile on your project, I want you to take a screenshot of what the output was. Like, were there compiler errors? Were there some type of other problems? Okay. Then, assuming if you're anything like me, you don't ever click compile the first time and get no errors. I always get errors the very first time I click compile. There's always something, some missing semicolon that I forgot, or some missing quotation mark that I forgot. So what I want you to do is then after you do that, I want you to go fix your errors, and then I want you to take another screenshot the first time that you click compile and there were no errors that you encountered. Okay, now this doesn't mean that's the last time you ever compiled your code, because you may have made changes after this. Okay, so I guess technically this one is kind of an optional too. These two might be together if the first time you click compile you didn't get any errors. All right, first test run. I want you to at first time you click the run button, I want you to assuming you're not required to click to create a main method, but you do need to test your code somehow. You do need to create either another class that has a main method in it or something, right? So the first time you run a test of some kind, I want you to do a screen capture of that as well. Again, same as before, I should have put optional here on the first compile, no error. But assuming again, if you're like me, I've never run code for the first time without getting an error of some kind. So the first time that you run your code and you get a no errors returned, I want you to give me a screenshot of that as well. That's the reason this one's optional, and technically this one's optional too, is the first time you run, you might get no errors. Lucky you, that's never happened for me. So I'm not sure how you could, unless well, I guess your code was super simple or something. I don't know. All right. Then what I want you to do is the last time you click compile and the last time that you click run before you submit your code, I want to have screenshots of what happened there. Okay. All right. So hopefully that's clear. So you need to have those screenshots in addition to your Java file. If you don't include the screenshots as part of your submission, you won't get a grade for this assignment. You'll just get a 0. Okay. So you have to do all of this in addition to your Java file. Okay. All right. What I would suggest you do is, as you take a screenshot of what you're doing, and it needs to be the entire screen. So it needs to include, the taskbar that's down below. It needs to include the window that you're working in. Okay. So, if you have like, a tab open in a Google Chrome browser behind there with like YouTube on it, you might want to, close that before you take your screenshot, right? Okay. All right. So let's see. Okay, so a couple of questions that you guys have been giving me. So some of you said, well, Hojum, you said that we have these requirements on the string for department, like it can only be 3 or 4 characters. You have this requirement for AKTC that it must be a positive value. What are we supposed to do if somebody tries to put a negative value in for AKTC or 0, or what happens if they put in the wrong number of characters? Okay, this is going to be interesting because you will not necessarily do the same thing as everybody else in the class on this. Okay, I'm going to make an announcement about this one because this one could be a little bit confusing. But basically, if your student number is odd, okay, so if your student ID is an odd number, then what you need to do is you need to give a default value of your choosing. So in other words, if AKTC, if they try to put in a negative number, you need to give it a default value, some other value, some all default valid value. So it could be 1, it could be 6, it could be whatever you want. We're going to say this is going to have some default value of your choosing. Okay, that's if your student number is odd. If your student number is even, okay, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 0, then you need to create an exception. you need to create a runtime error. So if I try to put in an acetese that is a negative number, then you need to end the code immediately by creating a runtime error. Okay, there are lots of ways you can do that. You just need to force it to happen. Okay, there's lots of ways that you can create a runtime error. All right. What I would suggest, honestly, is just create a method that creates a runtime error, and then if a bad value gets tried to be put in somewhere, call that method. Okay. Erison, if you mean that the codes don't fit on screen, I don't need to see all your code. I just need to see a screenshot of what happened when you clicked it, right? So maybe I'll show you an example just a second. Well, I mean, I showed you examples, right? I showed you examples in here, down here. Let's see, right here. See, below this main method is all of my classes. You see, all my classes were created. They're all inside of the assignment 1 Java file. They're all way down here, right? You can't see them because I don't want you to see them. I don't want you to see my solution. I want to see your solution. Okay. So here, this is an example of some test example main method code that you could create to test your own. I suggest that you do more than what I've done here, because what I've done here is really just very minimal. It's not a lot. Okay, but this is an example of the first time that I clicked run, or a time that I clicked run on this code. All right. Okay. An example of where you would click compile for the first time. Right, so here, notice I haven't written all my main method code yet. I wrote my classes. I wrote my course and my grad student, person, student, teacher. I wrote all those classes. I clicked compile. Notice you don't see all the code below that, but notice, oh, look, I had a compiler error. Right, I had a compiler error right there. I forgot my semicolon. All right. Really, like it's live, huh? That's interesting. I didn't, Like it displays like what the compiler error will be if you click compile. It's interesting. Okay, let's see. Maybe predictive compiler errors. Right, it maybe gives you a hint, but just the first time that you click compile, right, then if you're using an IDE that does that, then you likely won't have a first time you click compile and have some compiler errors then. Okay, let's see. Oh, one other thing. So you need those screenshots. Again, if your student number is odd, give me a default value for any invalid values passed to a set method or the constructor. If your student number is even, I need you to create a runtime error of some kind if somebody passes a bad value. Let's see. One final note. If anyone puts system.exit into their code at any point, then they will receive 0 on this assignment. Okay, I've talked with Taha Hoja about this. The reason being is that what the automated tool that he uses to test your code cannot handle a system.exit. Okay, we didn't teach that in this class. I never taught it. You probably learned that from some other source like a Stack Overflow or something like that. It is something that can be used to exit from a system, but to me it's not clean at all. It's not a good way to exit from a piece of code. So what I need you guys to do is not use them in this course. Okay, so you'll have to figure out some other way to end your code if you would have used a system.exit instead. Okay. Let's see. Part 3 and 4. Where is this? Which one are you talking about? Talking about teacher here and student. Right. Okay. Actually, Harrison, I understand what you're saying. And that's something that we're going to cover today because that has to do with inheritance. Since student is a child of person, it's going to inherit all of these attributes, right? So student, even though the only attribute that I had here is called acatese, because it's a child of person, a student still has a name. And a student still has an email address, and a student still has an ID, and it still has a department. Okay, I mean, I'm assuming you have a name, right? You are a person, right? So therefore, all these attributes get inherited. So that other, the student, teacher, I mean, I'm a teacher. I have a name. I have an email. And so what you're going to learn today, what we're going to get into today with inheritance, is the idea of there are some classes where we want to have like a general class, and then we want to have some more specific some more specific things that go with the lower classes. So for example, you're a student and you're a person. I'm a teacher. I'm also a person. There are certain things that we have in common. We all have names. We all have an email address. I have an ID and you have an ID. We both belong to a department. There's other things that we also have in common as well. So what we do is we define this class called a person class that has the general attributes, and then a teacher has a particular attribute that's only for teachers. And then a student has some attributes that are only for students. Okay. All right. So in fact, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's go ahead and get into some of that inheritance and polymorphism stuff. But first things first, we do need to finish off chapter 10. I realized we did not do chapter 10 just yet. Yeah. The thing is, what you're going to learn here with the inheritance stuff is what we don't do is we don't redefine the attributes again because we don't need to. They exist because it's a part of it. All right. Let me see. Let me share the slides here. Okay. Let's see. We left off. Where did we leave off? Okay. I said we were gonna get into these wrapper classes. So now that we're talking about classes and attributes of classes and methods that classes have, now we talked last semester about these what was called primitive types, right? Like the int primitive type, the double primitive type, where it was just a simple value. The char primitive type. Right, now, all of those primitive types have what are called wrapper classes. And the reason why these wrapper classes exist is that they are supposed to be used to be able to handle, provide methods and other things that we might want to use for those primitive types. So let's take a look at the integer and double, for example, here. All right, so so one of the big things that we'll use the integer class for is be able to get this what's called a parseint and a parse double method. Okay. Now notice these are underlined, so these are static methods, which means we don't have to have an integer object or a double object to be able to call these methods. But what we'll do is we will pass a string that might contain a numeric type, that might contain an integer in it. And if it does, it will give us that integer value. If it does not have an integer inside of it, if it's, letters, for example, or a decimal number like, 3.3 or something like that, then what'll happen is it'll give us a runtime error. Okay, so what we can use this parse int and parse double for a lot of times is if we have a string, if we have like a value we've asked the user for, like the using the next method from the system.in, right, from a scanner. We scan it, we use a scanner to get some value, a string value, and if what they've entered is a numeric type, then we will go ahead and process it. But if it's not, then we want to maybe have a runtime error because they've given us some bad values or something like that. Okay. But these are some methods that we can use. So notice these other methods up here, they're not underlined. So these are non-static methods, which means we would need to have an integer object that would contain some type of integer value. Now, we can also create an integer object by passing it a string as well, which basically will find out the value using parseint, and then just set it to that. Okay. So what we can do is we can give it this value of some kind, this integer value, and be able to do stuff with it. We can compare it to another integer object. This is mostly useful. Mostly, I would say one of the big things that we might use the integer or the double class for is, as we'll talk in the next section, we'll talk about inheritance, is because these are classes, then they inherit from a class called object. And what we might want to do is we might want to create an array or an array list that has a mixture of different things in it, that has integer types in it, double types in it, string types in it, other classes, even other objects, right? We want, if anyone's ever done any coding in Python, Python and a couple of other languages, their array type structures, in Python they call it a list, allows for a mixture of different types to be put in there. Well, if I create an array of ints, int, that's like int, then the only thing that can go in there is ints. I can't put doubles in there. I can't put strings. I can't put anything else besides integer type values, right? But if I create an array or an array list of objects or of numerics, right, then I can put any of this stuff in there and I can mix it all up in there. Okay, so that can be a very useful way that we might use integers and doubles being classes instead. Okay. Let's see. Max value, min value is based on what the maximum integer type can be and what the maximum double floating point number can be. Useful methods are conversion methods and value of, be able to get the double value, float value from an integer type. So we want to put it to a primitive variable. Okay. We can create a double object having the value of the 12.4. Now, basically what this does is this stores the value 12.4 as the value contained there, and then any methods that we would do, integer value, float value, stuff like that, would be based on this value that we initially passed to it. Okay. All right. One thing that we would often do is use this parse int or parse double method to be able to determine if the string value contains a numeric type that we'd like to convert. And if it contains a valid value, then it will give us whatever that value is. So it kind of does all the work of taking like if we pass it a string with the number 1, 2, like a string 1, 2 inside of it. It does all the work of figuring out that that's the value 12 and gives us the value 12. So we don't have to write our own methods to make that stuff happen. There's just an existing method that does it for us. Okay. One neat tool is that it converts automatically between types. So I don't have to make an integer object here. Right, so these are the same. So I can create a new integer object, but I don't have to. So this automatically boxes this 2 into an integer object of value 2 and puts it into my array. Okay, that's a nice tool of Java, that it automatically converts between the wrapper class type and the primitive type. In the same way, it will automatically unbox this, because int array 0 is going to give me an integer object, and when I go to print it, it will automatically print that value. Well, actually, I guess it'll print 1 plus 2 plus 3 should give me 6. So it'll automatically convert that to an int value for adding it. Okay. Let me skip ahead some. So this is basically some of those other classes, big integer and big decimal. But I don't want to spend too much time on there. Really what I want to spend some time on right now talking about is the string class. Is that, so strings in Java are considered to be a class, and strings themselves are objects. So this message points to a string object that's in memory. Now there's lots of things that we can do with strings. We can concatenate strings. We can concatenate them using a concat method. We can also concatenate them using the plus sign, as we guys learned last semester. We can do substrings, portions of strings. We can compare 2 strings together. We talked about that, about how that's going to work. Okay. We can find a character. We can do all kinds of things. There's multiple ways that we can create a string. Now, here, this is what you're most used to, is you have a string message equals, whatever your string is. Either a literal value that you type into the code, or it could be through a scanner next method, next line method, something like that. Right? Those are what you're most used to. You can also create them using the new string and passing it some string literal, passing it some value. Okay. But like I said, most of the time you're used to doing it this way. Okay. Now, strings are this special thing that we talked about called immutable. I think you guys talked about immutable. We've talked about it before, but I think you also talked about it in the lab this week. The thing about immutable is it cannot be changed. So we cannot change a character in a string. But you might say, well, wait a second, this changes the value in S, doesn't it? And that's kind of true, but it doesn't change the characters. It doesn't change character J to an H, A to a T, V to an M, and A to an L. Okay, it doesn't change the individual characters. What it does is, we talked about this, where we create this S variable that points to a string object in memory that has the value Java. Then, when we change the value of S, what happens is it creates a new string object out here. All right, and it just changes what S points to. This string object is now unreferenced. This string object is now not used anymore, doesn't connect to anything, so therefore it's going to be picked up by the garbage collection. We talked about that in previous weeks. Okay. There's another special thing that we can talk about that we'll talk called interned strings. So because here a string value may change, like we may change what the variable, what the value is that it points to. We may change that a lot, right, throughout the course of a program. So we could end up with a lot of extra strings out here and just kind of some craziness. Like we might end up with the same value for multiple strings in our system over and over again. So like, for example, if in the code I wanted to use the department CSE, as a string value over and over again throughout multiple places in the code, then what might happen is, right, so the string object, the value Java in this string object cannot change. Okay, so when we change what it points to, we don't just change this string object, we don't change its value, we create a new string object and we make s point to it instead. The reason why I bring this up is because there are other languages like C, for example, where strings in C, you would change the individual characters. You would change C treats strings as an array of characters. So you would change the individual characters in a string in C. But here, it's not that the characters themselves change, it's that if we change what s points to, it creates an entirely new string object and changes what that s points to it now. This object here cannot change. We cannot change a single character in this string. Okay. That's what it means by immutable. But now what we're talking about with the interim strings is that sometimes the same string value might get used multiple times. CSE, for example, a name, for example. So what will happen is if the same string is used more than once, without the new string operator, without a new constructor, if we just say, I want this to be equal to this here, and this is the same, if the executor, if while it's executing, it realizes, oh, that's the same string that I already created, then it will automatically make them point to the same object. So notice S1 equals S2 is false. Why? Because S1 doesn't point to the same thing as S2. The reason why S2, even though it has the same value, is a different string is because we forced it to be a new one. We forced it new string, welcome to Java. Okay. However, S1 equals S3 is true because they do both point to the same thing. When we executed this code, it realizes, oh, hey, this string is the same as this string, so I'm going to just use the same object I already got. Let's trace through and see kind of how this works, what happened there. So here, string S1 equals welcome to Java. We create a string object called welcome that has the value welcome to Java. We point S1 to it. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Here, we forced the execution to create a new string object. So it creates a new string object with the same value as there, but with the way it points S2 to that new string object. Here, we create another string object, but this time, as we're executing, the system realizes, hey, that's the same as what already happened up there. I already used that once before. Whoa. I already used that once before. Let me just reuse that same string I created before and point S3 to it. And we're done. Okay. We'll look at a couple of examples of that here in the next hour. Okay. Some different replacing. I want to talk about replacing for sure, because replacing is something that gets used a lot. Is when we say take this string and replace the lowercase e's with a capital A, we can get a new string. Now notice this, if I had a string called S1, for example, and it had the value welcome in it, and I said s dot replace E, comma A, like this, it would not change S, right? S or S1, whatever I called it. It would not change the string itself. It gives me a new string with these values, with these replacements having been made. Okay. You can also have a replace first, where you only replace one of the values if it's found. If this isn't found, if this lowercase e was not found in the string, it wouldn't make any replacements. It would just return a new string with the same value as the original one. Okay. We can replace one string with another string. Okay. Notice this does not replace. Let me look at the second one here. Notice this one, you could be tempted to say, oh, it's going to replace all E's with A's and all L's with B's, but that's not true. What it will do is it will replace all EL combination with a B combination. So here, notice that even though there's an E here, it doesn't replace it with an A. It says, oh, there's E, but there's no L following it, so I'm going to leave that E alone. Okay. All right. Replacing is something really useful, especially for if you want to remove characters from some text. All right, so if you wanted to remove all E's from the word welcome, we could replace E with empty string, right? E with quote, quote, double quote, and then with nothing in between it. And that would remove all the lowercase e's from our string. I'm not going to go into the pattern matching stuff here. I think it's useful, but it's not very important that you know this. But if you've ever worked with regular expressions or have any desire to do anything with regular expressions, it's an interesting topic, and it's interesting and it's useful, and it's good to know this. But I would say it's a little bit too much for some of you. So I'm just going to skip through that one, actually. Let's see. We already talked about that, about value of, right? Oh, I guess this is the opposite way. This is the taking a numeric type and putting it into a string. Okay. Good question, Tarana. Let me go back and talk about that. That's a very good question. So actually, you would not be able to do the single quote A, single quote AB. Single quotes are saying a single character. Okay. This is a single character that will be replaced by a single character. Double quotes in Java is a string. So even though there's only one character here, it's still a string of one character. Okay, so here you would not be able to put, for example, this here. You wouldn't be able to put that here with the single quotes instead of the double quotes, because a single quote with two characters inside would be a compiler error. Because it would say you're trying to use a single quote notation, which means one character, but you're giving me more than one. Okay. So, but that's a very good question. I think that might be a compiler error too, probably because of data types. I think that would be a compiler error because it would be a character as the first parameter and a string as the second parameter, and I think your compiler would not allow that. All right, let's see. Okay, so here I said give it a numeric type. It's going to give me a string back. consisting of the characters 5, dot, 4, and 4. Probably if you're working with a Turkish system, it might put that as a comma though. Yeah, Batuhan, yes, you could do both as single character strings. Yep, it would work the same way as the single character for both of them. Let's see. Is there anything else I want to specifically go over here? String Builder, feel free to look through the slides on string builders. Some of you used them last semester. I don't require them. They, again, they are a useful tool to have, but we won't necessarily test you on that. So, okay. And then, like I said, regular expressions. Feel free to look through the slides on regular expressions. I won't focus on that here, but basically you can use regular expression to do kind of a matching, to match patterns and stuff like that. So it is pretty powerful, pretty fun stuff if it's something that interests you. All right. So I wanted to hurry up and get through the chapter 10 slides so that we can get to chapter 11 in the second hour. All right, so what we'll do is we will take our break here now. It's a little bit earlier than I thought. So we'll take our break here now. When we come back, I'll either do examples from chapter 10 or I may push that off until the end, but we will get into chapter 11 during the second hour. We'll get into inheritance so that you guys can understand how this whole parent-child relationship works in classes. All right. See you guys in about 10 minutes.